Hariom, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. As the sun set in the horizon, 7 figures walked out of Hastinapur, the 5 Pandavas with their face cast down, except for being, their Guru Dhyomna chanting mantras from the Samaveda, dedicated to Lord Yama, and Draupadi, wearing a single cloth that was stained. Earlier that day, when Dushashan charged into her palace and dragged her out, she said to him, "I am on my season," the term used in those days to say, "I have my period, I'm on my menstrual cycle." And she says to him, "It is inappropriate for you to be treating me this way on any day, and especially while I have my seasons." She was dragged out anyway. The kingdom was lost, and now, as they walked out, she wore that same stained cloth. I've heard it being said, imagine Draupadi's shame that she had to wear that in public. And I never thought anything of it. I mean, none of us want to have anything stained, right? Even if I was eating a samosa and the chutney fell on me, you would want to get it out. Or if the ink from the pen leaked and we don't want that stain, we want to remove it. It's embarrassing, it's inconvenient, it's not aesthetically appealing. But the word used is shame. It's not like any other stain. It's a stain caused by the menstrual cycle. And so unfortunately, over the years, it has become a matter of shame. And there's a huge stigma associated with this. When we look at the word shame, it's a feeling of rejection, a feeling of being shunned. The word guilt, when we have guilt, we have done something horrible and we feel bad about the thing that we have done. The action is horrible, I'm still okay. But when there's shame, I'm the problem. I'm the one that's being rejected. I'm the one that's bad or inferior or not wanted. It's far more personal. And shame is something that's a cultural decision. Different things cause shame in different societies. And over the period of history, what has brought shame has also changed. And so it's deviating from what society has deemed to be normal, acceptable, recognized to be as status cultured. When we look at period, across all cultures now, there is this sense of shame, but it wasn't there originally. When we look at Celtic religions in the West, women were these creatures that bled every month and still continued to live amazing lives, and so were treated as goddesses with like a superpower. If we see the Native American culture, the bleeding was considered to be part of a spiritual purification process and increased her energy to be able to link in with nature more. And even in our culture, if we look at the Manusmriti, it's written very clearly that any excretion of the body is dirt, asachaha. But nowhere is it said that the person is asacha, dirty. And so whether it be a male or a female, of course, if the blood is there, then during that time, you don't enter a temple or a place of worship to help to keep the things clean. But even if a man had gone to a bathroom, he is required to have a bath before he comes into the temple. And so it wasn't the person that was considered dirty, just physical excretions are considered dirty. And in fact, in most of our scriptures, the body is considered nothing but dirt, male or female. But somewhere along the line, it changed. It wasn't a thing that was dirty. It became the person that was dirty. In the West, we find that this began around the time that Christianity became popular. And it is said that for 7 days she is considered dirty, and even anyone that touches her during those 7 days is dirty. And then people took this to a whole new level because, superstition creeps in and just illogical, irrational behavior creeps in, and women started getting blamed for ruining crops or for people getting sick. And even in the 1930s, where medical doctors said that while she is on her period, she secreted a hormone that made flowers die. It's completely ridiculous. In our country, in India, somewhere too, the culture degenerated. And it's not just that women now were considered dirty, even the caste system deteriorated, and people were considered untouchable. So something went wrong. Somewhere they developed a misunderstanding. But unfortunately, this stigma did get created. Women were dirty because they got their period every month. And that stigma led to horrible behavior. In the Manusmriti, it is said she can avoid cooking and not to touch things, and for those 4 or 5 days, let her rest, let her recuperate. And the idea was, let her rest. But it got taken to be she had to sleep outside the house. And in some places, she had to sit in a cardboard box for 5 days until she bled out. Not that she couldn't, it's not that, oh, take a rest, be well. It was like, don't touch me, don't touch anything else. You'll pollute it, you'll ruin it. And it's not just in India. We find this across the globe. This had happened. And then naturally, there's the sense of shame that you are dirty, you are inferior because you have this. In the recent Shabarimala happenings, all the talks that were being discussed, it became like a tagline. Periods is a natural biological function. Pretty much everyone started their talk that way, whether it was a man or a woman, whether they were pro or con women going into the temple. But it became very well recognized, natural biological process. In fact, extremely important biological process for the species to continue, for procreation to take place. And so we've come a long way. People have discussed it, and not in just discussions about it. The sanitary amenities that are available have significantly increased. Absorption technology has significantly increased, and the availability of these products have also been made easier so that women can access it and have a more comfortable life, not just, be shunned away from society, but can continue to go to school, can continue to go to work and to socialize. And so there have definitely been progress. But we're not there yet. Battles have been won, but the war has not been won. We see situation of women in Africa, which is still horrendous. We have young girls who, when they start their period and can no longer go to school or are ridiculed by some happening, like having their dress stained, are so traumatized by the incident that they suicide. We see the same thing happening in our own Mother India and in many other places of the world. So even though there's been progress, a lot more progress has to be made. And it's not so much now about getting sanitary facilities to everyone, even though that's still a need. Now the stigma slightly has changed. This whole concept of when a woman is on her period, she's moody, she's irrational, she's highly emotional, she's unpredictable. And this has now been built up. So if a woman is upset, are you on your period? And of course, that's going to make her even more angry. Or even I have heard that women are not given jobs because she's considered irregular or not predictable. Don't know when she'll be on her period and when she'll have an emotional tantrum. And so she's not as reliable to be given a position of importance. And if you're thinking, well, that's true, whether you are a man or a woman, you are part of the problem. Let's go back to, again, a healthier time in history. Ayurveda says, because it's a natural biological process, actually, there should be no pain. But today, most women, maybe 90%, 80% of women, have discomfort when they are on their period. But it makes logical sense. Pain is a sign that something's wrong. And so if it is a natural process and we are going to go through it every month, why is it painful? And in fact, in the West, there's research that has been done that the contractions of the muscle to be able to remove the things from the uterus is the same intensity of the contractions of the muscles in the heart when we're having a heart attack. And so it makes sense that women are uncomfortable. The intensity of the pain is equivalent to that of a heart attack, and yet Ayurveda says, but it shouldn't be painful. To explain, Ayurveda uses the doshas and imbalances to explain why we have pain today, and certainly we live very unnatural lives. But an interesting explanation I found in the Native American culture. They say that the women's period cycle is related to the moon, and so they call it the lunar cycle. And that originally every single woman ovulated on the full moon and bled on the new moon. And so the cycle was completely in sync with the moon. And it was a microcosmic cycle of all the seasons that happen in the year. And the flushing out of the blood was this cleansing that revitalized the women for the next month, just as the earth is revitalized in spring for the next season. And the moon, of course, is a reflection of the sun, and the bigger cycles are related to the sun. But with the invention of electricity, we no longer followed the cycles of the sun, and we were awake at night, and so all natural cycles went haywire, and therefore cycles related to the moon as well went haywire. And so today we find all this discomfort going on in the body because cycles are out of sync. Maybe so. Maybe that's the only reason. But also, if there is stigma related to period, once I got my period, I couldn't go to school. Once I got my period, I had to be ashamed and hide the sanitary napkin. I had to be, not say it to anyone. I would be considered as dirty. I would not be able to eat with the rest of the family. I couldn't touch the food. I couldn't touch so many things. Then that naturally associates a lot of negativity with that biological process. And so maybe some of the pain and the discomfort that we find is in the negative emotions and attitudes and impressions that are created in the general psyche of the world towards this biological process. And so what to do about it? How do we now go about making it right? We have to let go of the shame. And the first thing is to be able to talk about it. How many women can say, I've got my period, without any shame whatsoever? Very few. Most women won't say it out aloud, except maybe to very close people. And even when they're saying it to another woman, they'll whisper it. But we need to be able to take that step to be able to say it. And both men and women have to be able to hear it without judgment. This is a significant first step that we all have to take. We find even in the school system, some schools, the teacher just skips the chapter altogether because they're too embarrassed to talk about it. And also in schools, when girls are told that they will be getting their period, boys are separated, girls are separated, and girls are told in secrecy. But boys need to know as much as girls need to know. And if it really is natural biological process, Why the secrecy about it? So the first step is to be able to let go of the shame by saying it, talking about it, discussing it. The second step is far more difficult because it runs far deeper into our psyche. The way that any discrimination works is that the oppressor starts to believe that they are actually better than the other person. And the person who is oppressed starts to believe that they are not as good as the other person. So in this case of men and women, men who actually believe they are better than women, and women starting to believe that they are not as good as men. This is true for any kind of discrimination, whether it be blacks feeling they're not as good and whites feeling they are better. It's that belief that makes the prejudice continue and fuels it and keeps it alive. And when we are better, or we consider ourselves better and we have power, natural human instinct, we don't want to let go of that power. And interestingly, even when we feel we're not as good, it's very hard to let go of that feeling. And so this step takes a lot more self-reflection for us to make progress in. When we have one feeling they better and one feeling they worse, there's a horrible disconnect in the relationship that will definitely bring pain, sorrow, insecurity. When we're able to let go of better and worse and just be two individuals in a relationship, there's a beautiful connect in the relationship, which nourishes both people in the relationship. But this, like I said, is a very subtle problem that takes effort to work on. So how do we go about it? Because not only do we have to work on this situation, we have to then answer the bigger questions that are there. When a woman is on her period, does she have sex? Does she not have sex? Does she go into the temple? Does she not go into the temple? Well, we can take our lead from the wise people of the past. In the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna had his breakdown, Krishna didn't give him a list of rules to follow. Krishna explained to him, wise people do this. When we do this, this is the result. And in the explaining of how the mind works, how universal laws work, and what kind of outcomes come out of what kind of actions, Arjuna gained an understanding. And at the end of the Gita, Krishna gave Arjuna the choice. Now that you have this knowledge, now you choose whatever it is you want to do. What we need is to educate both men and women. Right now, what we have is a lot of misconceptions. We have a lot of stereotypes. We have a lot of conditionings that have been passed down from generation to generation. And it not only creates stress for the women, it creates stress for the man to have to play the role that they have to play. And it creates a disconnect in relationships. So when we educate, when we talk more freely, when we truly come to understand natural biological process and how it works, then each woman can decide for herself who she wants to be. And really, it's got nothing to do with gender. Again, on the spiritual path, we have to find our swadharma and our swabhava. That which, the thing that we do that's truly my passion and suits me and helps me to be the best person that I can be. And the personality that I am that kind of just fits and it helps me to blossom. And that swabhava has got nothing to do with the body. not with gender, not with age, not with the way we look. Our body is an extremely superficial way of seeing ourselves. On the spiritual path, we have to go deeper. In relationships on everyday levels, we have to go deeper. In the work that we do, for us to be able to truly accomplish, we have to go deeper. So here too, when we understand that the journey that each one of us has to take has to be one with understanding of this knowledge given to us from the scriptures, and two, our own introspection and reflection on how it applies to me as a person. And so coming back to Draupadi. Draupadi walked out of Hastinapur that day. Was she ashamed that her cloth was stained with period blood? Personally, I think she had much bigger problems to think about. And also, she had every reason to hold her head high. So why in the Mahabharata is that point mentioned? Why bring it up at all? To show that Dushashan was so inconsiderate. The shame is not that Draupadi was on her period and her cloth was soiled. The shame was on how Dushashan and Duryodhana treated her. In terms of Draupadi, on that day, she saved her 5 husbands from being slaves. On that day, she won back the kingdom and their wealth. It was lost again, but she had won it back. And on that day, Draupadi's love and devotion invoked the Lord to come as Vastra Avatar. Draupadi found her strength in her being. For her love to be that intense that the Lord manifested. It had nothing to do with her gender. Each one of us can truly hold Draupadi as an ideal to be able to live that kind of a life where we find our strength to help the ones we love and to be able to be so connected to the Lord. Hari Om. Shri Guru Namaha.